So you moved abroad and found a piece of paradise. Then this happened: protest, medical emergency, fire, natural disaster, or political instability. What do you do? How do you navigate this? Are you prepared for emergencies? Whether you're going to hunker down or you're going to flee, you need a plan. In this video, we will discuss preparing for emergencies as an expat while using Panama as an example. We will cover things you need to consider, like food you should stock up on, what to do if you want to evacuate, tips from some of my viewers, what happens if you have pets, vaccinations if you're going to another country, and what you should have in your emergency to go bag, and more. Hello, my name is Aisha and I navigate the world with a mobility constraint cerebral palsy. My channel helps people visually explore Panama and other countries to help them decide if they want to move there. This channel also discusses preparation for your new life abroad, no matter which country you choose to move to, while showcasing my travels from around the world. When I first moved to Panama, my building had an emergency evacuation drill, and at that moment I realized I was scared, unprepared, and kind of felt alone. So a couple of days before filming this video, I thought my building was on fire. It was engulfed in smoke. And once again, that was a reminder of how important it is to have an emergency evacuation plan or an emergency plan. Luckily, it wasn't my building, it was a few blocks away, but still, it was a good reminder. We need to be prepared for emergency situations. This is especially true if you're an expat or, even more importantly, a recent expat. Being in a new country can make these situations particularly more stressful and challenging, especially if you don't speak the language. Think about what you need daily. Do you have that list in mind? Now imagine not having access to those things. What would you do? Heck, what should you do? At the end of the day, knowledge and preparation are your best offense. Now, let's get started in no particular order on things that you should consider. I would suggest having a buddy system. This is really important as an expat. For example, I have women that live in my building, and we check in on each other every morning. And if we don't hear from someone, we'll knock on their door or send a message just to make sure that they're okay. Now, this buddy system should extend beyond where you just live. So for example, you can create a WhatsApp chat or another group chat with your buddy in the country you live in and your emergency contacts back home or your friends and family. That way, if something happens to you, everyone's in the same chat. Everyone knows who to contact, and the updates can be given accordingly. If you feel comfortable enough, maybe one of the buddies can have your spare key, and the administration in your building, if you live in a building, should know who that person is in case they need to come in during an emergency. Your emergency contact should know about any allergies or medical issues and should be able to speak on your behalf if they need to. This is an extreme example, but should be considered. If for some reason communication networks go down and you can't access money from ATMs or you can't use your credit cards, what are you going to do? This happened in New York City. There was a time when the networks went down and you couldn't use your credit cards. For example, you have a $20 bill and you were going to a store. You wanted to buy a loaf of bread and a bottle of water. You handed them a $20 bill and they didn't have change. That loaf of bread and water was now costing you $20. So if you can, have money put aside in cash with small bills and some change that you only use during emergencies. Some of this money should also be kept in your emergency to go bag, which we'll cover later on in this video. I would suggest also having at least one credit card that is only to be used in an emergency and does not have a balance on it. So if you need to charge your way out of a hospital or a country, you'll have the flexibility to do so. I would also suggest keeping some money in the same place that you keep your ID cards, just for emergency situations that's easily accessible. Speaking of ID cards, you should have physical copies of all of your cards and also have digital copies of all your cards on your phone in one photo album that's easily accessible. During times of unrest, certain foods and water can become harder to come by and be prone to price increases. So if you have any type of warning, it's better to stock up ahead of time. Stocking up means having a supply of non-perishable food items that can last for a week. The longer the better. Think canned goods, dried fruit, nuts, and grains. And don't forget about water. And this isn't just about water for you, it's also water for your furry friend. During the recent protests in Panama, there was a part, it might have been Cherokee, where the municipality was stating that they were going to run out of the chemicals that they use to disinfect the water. Now, I don't know that they did, I'm not saying they did, but imagine that happening. Most people don't think about the water and sewer systems during emergencies. So stocking up on water is very, very important. Get your meats, fish, veggies, fruits, and prep and freeze accordingly. During the recent protests in Panama, fresh veggies were hard to come by, and because of roadblocks, it lasted for weeks. So one of my viewers suggested the following when she watched my video on what it was like for me living during the Panama protests. I don't know where it is. So let's see what she said. I was really truly surprised at the number of expats in different areas that didn't have a stock supply. But then I remembered small kitchens, limited storage, and other things I noted about the homes I visited there. Here, I keep years worth of food at all times. I rotate frozen and canned food by date, using the oldest first, then replacing it. You know why? Hurricanes. So next on the list is medication. If any member of your family or yourself relies on medication, it's paramount to have an ample supply. Protests, natural disasters can disrupt supply chains, making it difficult to obtain necessary medications. It's a good idea to have at least a 2-week supply of any essential medicines. If possible, try to have a month's supply. I think I ended up getting 2 or 3 months worth of medication when the protests started. And like the water, let's not forget about medication for our fur babies. Additionally, it's worth considering basic first aid supplies, bandages, antiseptics, pain relievers, etc. In emergency situations, you never know when these might come in handy. I would leave some in your house, your car, and in your emergency to-go bag. Keep an inventory and rotate your stock to ensure nothing expires. As mentioned earlier, I have cerebral palsy. If you have a mobility constraint or an impairment, extra thought might be needed during times of emergencies as an expat. I would suggest the following. 1. Having a transportation service on standby that agrees to assist you in times of distress. 2. Having someone identified ahead of time that agrees to help you during an emergency. 3. Notify your building administration team to contact emergency personnel to let them know you need help in times of emergency, for example, a fire. 4. If you live in a house, let a neighbor know to tell emergency personnel that you have constraints or impairments. So propane and electricity are not guaranteed during an emergency, and it's something that we often don't consider or think about. So during the recent protests here, there were certain parts of the country that were experiencing gas shortages, and they had to receive help from Costa Rica. So in reference to gas and propane, here's another comment from one of my viewers. Yes, I was house hunting in July 2022, and in fact, I got there 2 days before the protest. I was stuck on the Inter-America Highway for 5 hours. The protest was just as bad as the current one going on, but sadly people didn't learn from last year's protests to take some preparation measures, like buying a single double electric hot plate, large pots to boil hot water, getting an extra propane tank or 2. But majority of expats and locals didn't heed the warning of the protests. Our furry friends need to be prepared too. Are your pets ready? It's crucial to plan for their needs as much as it is for our own. So how do we ensure that our pets are ready? Firstly, you need to stock up on pet food. People suggest a couple of weeks. I had about a month's worth. So remember, in challenging times, pet food can become as scarce as human food, so it's better to prepare accordingly. And don't forget about their water needs. We prepared for ours, but they need fresh water as well. So water for your pets should be factored into overall water needs. In your emergency to-go bag, you should have an item for your pet that will bring some sort of familiarity, like a toy or a blanket. I would consider having an emergency bag for them as well. Let's think about their health. Do you have their medication stocked up? It's also a good idea to have a copy of your pet's medical records. I would keep this in the same place as where you keep your IDs. If you need to leave the country, do you know what the airlines require for your pets? If we got our pets here from the US, we know how daunting that could have been for some of us. It can be equally as daunting trying to get them out. So contact your airlines or know what country you might want to go back to, whether it's the US or another country, and see what their requirements are ahead of time. So once you figure that out, how far in advance do your pets need to see the vet? You need to factor this into your plan. And of course, let's not forget about waste management. Pack enough waste bags or cat litter to last a few days. It's a detail that can be easily overlooked, but it's essential to maintain hygiene and comfort. In the face of danger, sometimes the best option is to flee. Can you evacuate within 12 to 48 hours? If the answer is no, or you're unsure, don't worry. We're here to guide you through the essentials of the evacuation preparedness. First, let's talk about that ready-to-go bag that I've referenced. So this is a bag that you've packed in advance that can sustain you for 24, 48, 72 hours. It should include clean water, non-perishable food, a first aid kit, essential medications, a change of clothes, personal hygiene items, important documents, and cash. If you have young kids or kids, maybe pack a book, their favorite game, or maybe even their favorite snacks. So now that we have an emergency bag packed ahead of time, what's your evacuation plan? Now this is a strategy you've thought out in advance that details exactly what you'll do in case you need to leave your home or even leave the country. Key elements of this plan include knowing your evacuation routes, having a predetermined meeting place if you're separated from your family or travel companions, and knowing the location of the nearest safe haven, whether that's a designated shelter or another country. Keep in mind, the emergency plan or the evacuation plan isn't here to stress you out, it's here to help you. So think of it like a fire drill. A flexible plan is one that allows for alternatives. Medical emergencies don't wait for the perfect time. Picture this, you're in a foreign country and suddenly you fall ill. You're rushed to the hospital, but there's a language barrier. Your life may depend on a piece of paper, your medical directives, that clearly state your medical wishes. This situation is not as uncommon as you may think, and that's why it's paramount to have your medical directives documented. Do you have your medical directives in more than one language? Like if you speak English, are they also in Spanish? Do you have people in your new country that know how to contact your power of attorneys or your families back home? Think back to what I mentioned earlier about the buddy system. Are those medical and power of attorneys even recognized in your new country? This is something that you need to know ahead of time. In a country like Panama, where Spanish is the primary language, having your medical directives in Spanish as well as English ensures that your healthcare wishes are understood, regardless of the language spoken by your healthcare provider. Your medical directive should also list any allergies or medical conditions in 2 languages, both English and, for example, Spanish. Do you have a list of the nearest hospitals? If you have to flee to another country, is it a country that requires vaccines? Do you know? If you only have a few countries as a choice, what do you do? Consider yellow fever, for instance. I was denied boarding a plane to the Bahamas because I didn't have the yellow fever vaccine. What if there was an emergency and I needed to leave right away? What would I have done? So in an emergency, you don't want this to be what holds you back. I have a video on my yellow fever debacle here, linked in the description below. So if you haven't already, take a moment to check your records. Are they up to date? If not, this might be the time to schedule a visit to your healthcare provider. So what should you do with your current home if you decide to leave? In Panama, it's hot and humid, and we tend to get a lot of mold. Do you have a trustful neighbor that's staying behind or a friend that can keep an eye on your place? Does anyone have a set of your spare keys? If you live in an apartment building, does management know the name and ID information of the person who has your keys? Being prepared is not about living in fear, it's about living with peace of mind. These are just a handful of the many steps you can take to be prepared. Remember, it's not about expecting the worst, but being ready for it. Everyone's plan will be different. The key is just to have one. Because there was Any place you keep a loaf of bread. Middle, oh my gosh. Understood at that moment how. There's a helicopter going by. Of course, the battery, just not the battery. Memory card was full. Tree that had, and my battery's about to die. If you found this video to be helpful, you might enjoy these, which discuss my first experience with protesting in Panama, or one regarding my vaccination debacle at the airport.